Today we speak with Jason Bordoff, founding director of the Columbia Center for Global Energy Policy, about the geopolitical challenges and the energy transition. I am Mash'al Kindi, and this is ADNOC Insights. Welcome to ADNOC Insights, Jason.
Thanks, Michelle. It's good to be with you.
Thank you. So what are the top 3 geopolitical issues facing the oil and gas industry in the upcoming year?
Well, there's nothing new about geopolitical risk to the oil and gas industry, of course, but this is a time when there's especially large and consequential risks, both bearish and bullish. So there's sanctions being put in place by the US against Iran, against Russia, Venezuela, that create a lot of uncertainty about the oil outlook. The trade war, that is a really significant potential bearish signal on the demand side. Populist movements around the world, in the US, with the UK with Brexit, and Brazil with Bolsonaro. And then on top of all of that, this increasing urgency around the world and youth movements and student protests to take the issue of climate change much more seriously.
Can you elaborate a bit further on the geopolitical challenges that you mentioned?
Well, sanctions is a big risk to the energy market now. The sanctions has always existed, but I think the US in particular is increasingly turning to sanctions as a tool of foreign policy for difficult problems that it's not clear what the solution is to. And I think the circumstance now with Iran is probably the most worrying. I'm not sure that the oil market fully appreciates the level of geopolitical risk that the US approach to sanctions is taking. It's taken a very hard line, as we know, to pulling Iranian oil off the market, has been more successful at doing that unilaterally without partners, because there's broad opposition to the reimposition of sanctions in many parts of Europe than I thought the United States could be. And this is having a real economic impact on Iran. So Iran has made it clear that it's not able and willing to sustain the status quo, and it's going to try to push the US out of its comfort zone and undertake some provocative actions against Saudi energy installations or others to try to force people to come to the table and have a negotiation. And that may lead to, and President Trump has signaled an openness to having a dialogue with the Iranians, and maybe that leads to a resolution where Iranian oil suddenly comes back to the market. Or on the other hand, these provocative actions could spiral out of control into real conflict in the region. So the level of risk in both directions is pretty significant.
So what are the strategic choices available to oil and gas companies to meet these challenges?
The oil and gas industry is used to dealing with geopolitical risk, and in the face of geopolitical uncertainty like this, it's important to be as nimble and flexible in your business plans as possible. The industry is trying to bring down cost of production and invest in lower cost sources of resources that we're going to need for years to come. Thinking about the near-term necessity to continue to supply oil and gas to the world, but also longer-term issues of transition, and longer-term what it looks like to decarbonize oil and gas and then increasingly move to zero-carbon forms of energy.
So you've stated that the world needs stronger leadership when it comes to energy transition. What kind of leadership are you asking for, and who will provide it?
I think we all need to provide it. There's a role for governments, of course, to provide leadership in energy, and that means coming together with stronger international cooperation and diplomacy. I think it's unfortunate what my own administration in the US has done to weaken some of our international relationships. The energy system is global. Climate change is the most global of problems. And then we need leadership from industry, and that means continuing to chart a path forward to supply the world with the energy that it needs today, while also taking a leadership role in thinking about what cleaner forms of energy and more sustainable forms of energy are going to look like over time.
Okay, now there are a number of definitions that we can give to energy transition. What are the top issues that you think would make a meaningful impact in this transition?
Well, I think the number one issue when we think about an energy transition is dealing with the threat of climate change. It's not the only one. There's air pollution problems around the world. Emerging markets are choking on their own air quality. They're increasingly trying to reduce that and improve that. And there's an important role for natural gas to play there, for renewables to play there. Over time, we need to think about meeting rising energy demand around the world. Historically, economic growth has meant energy demand rises, and we want people to have the benefits that come with increased energy use of refrigeration and air conditioning and mobility and health. Over time, we also need to make sure that we're lowering the carbon footprint of those energy resources. And that means lowering the carbon footprint of the oil and gas sector itself, carbon capture, direct air capture, reducing methane emissions, and then increasingly increasing zero carbon forms of energy moving forward.
With the challenges and issues facing the energy world, would you recommend young aspiring talent to join the energy industry?
I think the energy industry is one of the most fascinating out there is. I wouldn't have devoted my career to it if I didn't. It's one of the most global industries. If you're interested in science and engineering, if you're interested in international affairs and foreign policy, there are few industries that provide you with the breadth of opportunities that the oil and gas industry does. Just look at the footprint of the world's largest oil and gas companies or the major NOCs like ADNOC. It's fascinating, and if we're going to solve the most important challenges facing humanity, how do we continue to improve our material well-being and prosperity, and how do we make sure that we're doing it with an environment that's clean and healthy? We have to have young emerging talent that's helping to chart the way forward in this industry.
So in your view, how do companies like ADNOC attract this kind of talent?
Well, I think young talent wants to work for the most important companies in the world that really have the vision, the strategy, the capital availability to move the needle, because the decisions that a company like ADNOC makes, or some of the largest international oil companies make, that's going to determine what our energy future looks like. The decisions you make with your capital budget are going to determine what the future of the world looks like. So I think it's incredibly exciting, and I think you want to show young people that you're thinking about the importance of supplying available energy resources in the near term, and there's also a strategy for the long term to make sure that we supply the energy resources the world needs as sustainably as possible.
Jason, it was a pleasure having you. Thank you for your valuable insights.
Thank you for having me. It was good to talk with you, and always good to talk with ADNOC. Appreciate it.
A pleasure.